So welcome everyone to tonight's talk is about mindfulness of mind, the thief who steals our happiness. So Lama Yeshe, who many of you know is he was a beautiful Tibetan Lama, said that our real enemy, the thief who steals our happiness, is the inner thief, the one inside our mind, the one we've cherished since beginningless time. And therefore, we should make the strong determination to throw it out and never let it back in. So in this talk, we're going to get up close and personal with this thief who misappropriates our happiness. So a way to think about mindfulness of mind and what we're going to be talking about tonight is that these are skills. These are really practical skills that we can apply to the mind and how we protect our happiness. So mindfulness is a big part of that, and that's what we're cultivating on this retreat. And to develop these skills takes incredible patience and courage as we digest the teachings and begin to metabolize them. And we can start to, slowly feel them working on us from the inside out. This allows us to unravel our patterns of conditioning that we've been accumulating since often before we were born. So in the third of these four foundations, and this is mindfulness of mind, the Buddha asked, and how, bhikkhus, does one in regard to the mind contemplate the mind? And then he went on to explain, here one knows a lustful mind to be lustful, and a mind without lust to be without lust. One knows an angry mind to be angry, and a mind without anger to be without anger. One knows a deluded mind to be deluded, and a mind without delusion to be without delusion. One knows a contracted mind to be contracted, and a distracted mind to be distracted. So in his list that he made in this sutta, in this really important teaching, he was emphasizing how we can come to know the presence but also the absence of the three unwholesome mind states, or the three, in Tibetan tradition they're called the three poisons of the mind, which are greed, hatred and delusion or ignorance. And delusion and ignorance it also encompasses confusion, which is really relevant to the times that we're living through, and more about that later. But the Buddha emphasized that in paying attention to the quality of mind, when the mind is free from greed, hatred and delusion, we begin to notice that there can be an openness and a sense of peace and a sense of ease. And my friend and teacher Lama Tendo, who's a beautiful Tibetan monk who lives in Melbourne, he says that all suffering comes from mental obscurations and afflictive emotions. And the metaphor is like the radiance of our true mind is like the sun, and the clouds which are our passing thoughts, passing emotions, these mind states obscure the radiance of the sun, and so it's difficult to see clearly. And when we don't see clearly that the thief sneaks in and steals our happiness. So one of the things that I have most loved, many things that I've loved and appreciated about the Buddha Dharma, But as a psychologist, we're trained to be great skeptics. And so there's a sense of this gentle questioning, investigating, and an invitation to never succumb to dogma or belief, but to be curious and non-judgmental. And to, when we can cultivate those qualities, we can begin to transform the experiences that we're directly having into wisdom. And then we can make choices about what we actually do with that knowledge and how we show up in the world. So the mind, as we know and as we've been experiencing through this retreat, has what's referred to as changing weather patterns of mood, feelings, emotions like happiness, sadness, anger, joy, anxiety, hope, agitation, love, and equanimity. And in a beautiful poem by Rumi called The Guest House, Rumi referred to these things that pass through the mind as guests. And I'd just like to recite this poem now, if that's okay, because it's really beautiful and many of you know it. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes like an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honourably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So these guests are like colour our mind states, and that we can also think of the guests like the thieves that Lama Yeshe spoke of. So how can we get to know these thieves and guests intimately through our practice, and also get to know what it feels like when they're absent? So we usually sense that our internal mind states are caused by external events. But this is actually wrong view in the first of the Eightfold Path. These states are based on us being the perceiver or the mind itself. So when we look again at our practice and cultivating serenity or the heart, and we know from these skills that we're developing that it's a radical act to turn towards what's painful and difficult. But when we do that, we see that the thief arises through our perceptual mind, and our practice allows us to see that these are mental states of anger or attachment or delusion, and therefore they're not fixed or permanent. So how do we deal skillfully with the thief? So through mindfulness, we become aware and recognizing and knowing unwholesome conditions of mind states and the wholesome ones that arise in their absence. And the Buddha taught us ways to protect our happiness. And he spoke about being protective of our happiness. And in our Western culture, this can often be problematic in that unwholesome mind states like anger or greed can lead to this second arrow of judgment that I'm sure I'm very familiar with. I'm sure resonates as well, which is where we begin to increase our suffering exponentially. So it's like, not only do I feel these states of mind, but there must be something wrong with me that I'm feeling these things. When we go back to what Rumi was saying about welcome and entertain them all the guests, and Rumi added a really critical part of actually smiling at all the guests, and that's like the loving kindness, because those guests are a part of ourselves, and if we're fighting with them, there's aversion, it's like we're committing violence towards ourselves. So why then is there so much avoidable suffering in the world, and these constructs of and things like racism or violence, war, hunger, injustice? And why do we have so many problems in our interpersonal relationships? Is this suffering just the enactment of an unwholesome mind state and states? And how might we begin to transform not just our own mind, but our collective consciousness? So our happiness and peace in the world is dependent on us knowing what is skillful and what is not skillful, and then to determine how we actually work with these mind states when they arise. The Dalai Lama suggests that actions should not ultimately be measured by their success or failure, but by the motivation behind them. We can't always control outcomes, but we can train our minds and hearts. And this is the really important training of the third foundation of mindfulness, mindfulness of mind. In the Dhammapada, which is a Buddhist text that was written for lay people, is that, or a collection of verses? The Dhammapada outlined the manifestation of unwholesome mind states, saying, there is no fire like lust, no grip like anger, no net like delusion. And the practice of mindfulness of mind encourages us to turn towards and experience these states. Joseph Goldstein says that through this we might feel that fevered excitability of wanting, or like a sense of greed, of wanting more. We might experience also a tightness or a contraction, an alienation of anger and hatred. We might feel the confused entanglement of delusion. And the Thai master Buddhadasa describes these tendencies in yet another way, that he describes pulling in, pushing away, and turning around in circles. I know for myself, whenever mindfulness or suffering or confusion arises, that it's incredibly helpful for me to drop in to see which of the three poisons is colouring my mind. And then I think I'm getting better at applying metta to what's arising in that pain. And from that place to then investigate whether there's clinging or aversion, or even whether I'm believing these delusional, confused thoughts to be true. And that's the ignorance. And so seeing into those things can bring almost immediate peace and a sense of relaxation to the mind. And in writing this Dharma talk, and I'm a fledgling Dharma teacher, by the way, like this is, so it very much, there's a lot to learn. But I was assailed this afternoon into earlier today by the not knowing states of mind that I recognized wanted to control and predict and grasp onto. So fear, anxiety, and judgment, it was really the works, really. And the happiness thief snuck in stealthily and made made, I'm not sure if it's a male or a female, made whoever it is very much at home, and almost made it out the door with my confidence, but I just grabbed them back in time, so didn't take it away. The skillful means this afternoon, though, involved remembering to relax my body as the first part of that, connecting with the breath, and then in this extraordinary environment that's Sangsurya, remembering that we have this capacity to change our state of mind by connecting with beauty and joy. And so that sense of beauty that radiated out from Sangsurya and the plants and the birds this afternoon, also then my mind was reminded of a beautiful Zen story about the Buddha and a farmer who was worried, anxious, and stressed. And the farmer asked the Buddha if anyone had seen his cows. And then he said to the Buddha, "Without my cows, I can't live." And the Buddha said in a compassionate way to the farmer to look in the opposite direction. And then he said to his students, "My dear friends, you are the happiest people in the world. You don't have any cows to lose. If you have too many cows to take care of, you will be very busy. That's why, in order to be happy, you have to learn the art of cow releasing. You release the cows one by one. In the beginning, you thought that those cows were essential to your happiness, and you tried to get more and more cows. But now you realize that cows are not really conditions for happiness. They constitute an obstacle for your happiness. That's why you are determined to release your cows." So releasing our cows, relaxing the mind, and connecting with joy allows for guests, cows, and thieves to flow freely so they don't get stuck and feed so they don't get stuck, and we don't continue to feed them unnecessarily through our aversion and contraction. But this can be a really common thing where, we get into the cycle of actually nurturing those things that impede our happiness. And there's a beautiful Native American tale that Karen and Mel reminded me of today that highlights the strength of the choices that we have. It's called The Tale of Two Wolves, that many of you will have heard. One evening, an old Cherokee told his grandson about a battle going on inside him and others. And he said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves that are inside us all. One is evil, it's anger, envy, jealousy, doubt, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. And the other is good. It's joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, forgiveness, truth, compassion, and faith." And the grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" And the old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you choose to feed." So with skillful means, we trust our practice and the Buddha's instructions to see that the difficult mind states themselves are not the problem. They're part of our practice and an important part of the path, and like everything else, are impermanent and not who we are. So something like fear is a mind state, And with a willingness to open to this guest and explore the terrain means that suddenly we're not trying to avoid and therefore become an accomplice to this, the thief attempting to steal our happiness. An obstacle to happiness can also be the contracted and distracted mind. And so the Buddha also urged us to be mindful of these wholesome and unwholesome states of mind, to be mindful of contraction of mind and often the sloth that comes with the contraction, and the distracted mind where restlessness can be underlying distraction. So when we don't get caught in these states of contraction and distractedness, the mind can find a way to balance and allow for the conditions to be right for us to move into deeper states of concentration. So I'm always blown away by the brilliance of the Buddha in his capacity to normalize the human mind and normalize these mind states and common difficulties that we encounter in our human practice. Joseph Goldstein says that the Buddha was saying mindfulness of all these states when they arise is the path to freedom. Through bare attention and mirror-like wisdom, we see their ephemeral, impermanent, and selfless nature. And this itself is cause for liberation. So what about mind states of mood and emotions? So because we often personalize moods and emotions and identify with them, like I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, as we practice mindfulness of mind, we notice more clearly what moods and emotions are present and how they color our experience and in turn condition the mind. And we do this without inserting our sense of self while we're observing mind. And this opens up to what Ajahn Chah called a taste of freedom. And he said, this is a beautiful quote, "With itself, the mind is already peaceful. That the mind is not peaceful these days is because it follows moods. It becomes agitated because moods deceive it. The untrained mind is stupid. Sense impressions come and trick it into unhappiness, suffering, gladness, and sorrow. But the mind's true nature is none of these things. Gladness or sadness is not the mind, but only a mood coming to deceive us. The untrained mind gets lost and follows these things. It forgets itself, and then we think that it is we who are upset or at ease or whatever. But really, this mind of ours is already unmoving and peaceful, really peaceful. So we must train the mind to know these sense impressions and not get lost in them. This is just the aim of all this difficult practice we put ourselves through. So in the last part of instructions on mind, the Buddha says really clearly to know the mind as great and the narrow mind as narrow, a surpassable mind as surpassable, and an unsurpassable mind as unsurpassable, a concentrated mind as concentrated, and an unconcentrated mind as unconcentrated. And finally, a liberated mind as liberated, and an unliberated one as unliberated. So the importance of mindfulness of mind then can't be underestimated in how we monitor and make choices about how we respond. And this importance is summed up by, I hope I pronounce his name right, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, yeah, about the importance of monitoring the mind. One thing you need to remember and understand is that you cannot leave the mind alone. It needs to be watched constantly. If you do not look after your garden, it will overgrow with weeds. If you do not watch your mind, defilements will grow and multiply. The mind does not belong to you, but you are responsible for it. So clever, yeah. The Buddha also taught us to develop insight internally and also externally. That when we're mindful of mind externally and we see something that inspires love in, or even if we see someone who's angry or greedy or generous, then based on our own resonance of those states, our own experience, we become aware of the other person's mental state. And this can help us too to become unmindful. This can help us too to be free of our own unmindful states and unmindful reactivities, so it can help us to be present. Being mindful of the feelings of others opens many possibilities as well in experiencing joy and pleasant feelings other than envy, can also help us to have compassion for the pain and suffering of others rather than fear or even apathy. And this is really important in helping us to sense and remember who we are in this sense of interconnectedness of all things. So being here now in these moments of the retreat, this is the most extraordinary opportunity to practice getting up close and personal with these mind states. It's really amazing. And to receive, as we do this, these ancient teachings that are like precious jewels. So we can investigate more deeply and understand what we know to be our experience of mind. It's said, and I think it's been mentioned by Mal as well, about impermanence, and the truth of impermanence is said to be a really important understanding on the path of awakening, through this understanding that it's clinging to things that we believe to be true, which are of the nature to die, including our bodies, that create suffering, and that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, and therefore there's a sense of unsatisfactoriness when we try to hold on. So we know also with thoughts, as mind states, that thoughts can be subtle, like ideas or assumptions, and others can be very strongly linked to judgment and also mind states of anger. Or thoughts can also be linked to joy. The mind and thoughts are not the same. And thoughts are like clouds that pass through the sky. And the mind is like the vastness of the sky, the knowing part of the mind. And we know that thoughts arise and dissolve without any permanency. But it's our relationship with thoughts that influences our mind. So in this way, we begin to pay attention to the nature of mind and can see how the thief that steals our happiness is not actually the mind itself, but a passing array of thoughts and perceptions and mood states that are like clouds passing through the sky. So we often get caught in these moments of unawareness through often not having paid much attention to the mind or the nature of mind. And so when we look into the mind itself, we come to see that it's often our habit energies that contribute to these patterns of suffering, or also referred to as samsara. And this is how we get caught and carried away by the thief. We can think of meditation training as strengthening our capacity to be aware of thoughts and mental formations, and to hold them with mindfulness and loving presence. And in this case, we're examining the mind not in an intellectual, theoretical way, but we're just looking and observing at the way things actually are. And we know, as we've been sort of investigating, that when we come to look for who's actually looking, who's mindful, who's perceiving, who's thinking, that we can't actually find specifically, who this is or who the thief may be. But as Rinpoche, and I forgot his last name, I'm sorry, but he says that the reality is that seeing occurs without a seer and thinking without a thinker. And this is just how it is. This is the nature of the mind. Something that always helps to motivate me hugely in my practice and to continue to follow this path of the Dharma is when I remember that I'm not just doing this for myself, that I'm doing this, I think, a lot for my clients that I work with, for my family, for my loved ones, and even for my dog, because my dog always reminds me when I'm not present and just brings the most joy and happiness when in those moments of connectedness. I can see you smiling. We know, hey, you're not present. So in thinking about why we're doing this work too, it helps us to touch what Thich Nhat Hanh beautifully refers to interconnectedness as interbeing. And this sense of interbeing is really important in reminding us that we're not separate from the earth, that we are part of the earth. And when we can move like this from the individual to the collective societal space, we can see how it's these unwholesome mind states that continue to create and have contributed to division and separation in the world, creating constructs like apartheid and gender and class, age, sexual preferences, geographic and religion. So the Buddha Dharma offers a way to deeply understand interbeing, interconnectedness, and that helps us to remember that we're part of a living process. And that mindfulness of mind is part of that process. We have almost like a duty of care through interbeing to train our minds to observe what's happening. And here at Sangsurya, the trees and the water dragons, the birds, the spiders that are gracing us with their presence, the changing colours of the ocean and the vastness of the sky are our greatest teachers. They offer reminders of joy and beauty and impermanence in each moment, just like the earth keeps giving and giving and giving, despite what us humans keep doing. Epictetus, the Greek Stoic philosopher who died in 135 AD, said, You become what you give your attention to. If you don't want to choose what thoughts and images you expose yourself to, someone else will. Epictetus identified that not only are we responsible for our actions, but through unawareness, we risk becoming whatever it is that our mind is exposed to. And in this age of misinformation, lies, and confusion, it's up to us to be intimately aware with the thief, both internally and externally, who can steal our happiness. Thich Nhat Hanh says to remember to make good news every day. And he encourages us not to allow the bad news to be a virus in us. So when we cultivate mindfulness of the body and have somatic practices that help to connect us with the whole of life, this provides a foundation to work with the mind and transform these unwholesome mind states into the benevolent wellspring that's within us all. And even when we're faced with insurmountable challenges, we can draw on memories and experiences that we've had, including, being here at Sangsurya, that can be like nourishment and nutriment to sustain us like beyond the retreat, and nourish our practice in the present moment. And I know for me, I just have to think of Mal and Lama Tenda, who've been my teachers and beautiful friends and mentors on this Dharma journey. And it's almost magical, like the thief that steals my happiness actually dissolves because I'm feeling their energy. And over the years, I've trusted more and more this practice, and it's so simple and it's always available. And yet when we're entangled in pain, our reflexive instinct is to stop the pain instead of cultivating a relationship with the pain. When we push away from the pain, there's avoidance and hatred. And when we turn towards, there's mindfulness and compassion. And some more, everything here at Sangsurya is so extraordinary. It's been a place where there's been so much spiritual practice that's gone on here for 30 years more, maybe. Is it 30 more years? Yeah. It's based on, there was Sufi kind of traditions, so it's very much a place of the heart and holds this beautiful energy for these practices that we're doing. And we just have to look around, and it's not just Sangsurya and the beautiful gardens, it's this extraordinary group of Sangha that we've become just in a couple of days, where we're nourishing each other by just through our presence and being together. And these are things that we can, again, consciously draw on wholesome states of mind or happiness. And it's like building resilience in our nervous system that helps us to connect with equanimity and a greater capacity for joy and well-being. So a deep understanding of mindfulness of mind is also necessary for how we navigate our way forward in these times we're living through. The times of misinformation, of consumption and greed, collective habit patterns of the social systems we find ourselves living in that reflect an undying busyness that seems to take over our lives and makes us believe that we must be productive and continually expand our productivity. So this is a narrative that we must change, or we risk trying to look at and approach the problems in the world with the same thinking that created the chaos in the first place. And this is the habit energy that we can begin to change through observing our own minds. Some of the problem lies in imagining with creativity how we might contribute to possibilities if the narratives that our minds are ingesting are constantly about despair and hatred. Thich Nhat Hanh, I've been doing a study group with Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village. It's a 7-week course called Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet, and there'll be another one next year if anyone's interested. It's been extraordinary in bringing the Dharma teachings into how can we help with the healing of the world. But Thich Nhat Hanh urges us to challenge the system, but not to sacrifice the wonder that is in us and around us. So to understand the thief who steals our happiness is to look deeply into the nature of mind and recognize through the vast brilliance of the Buddha's teachings that it's with presence that we get to choose in each precious moment how to welcome, observe, and transform the thief who steals our happiness, as well as letting go of our cows and creating myriad possibilities for living in love and in connection with the earth and all beings. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So we might just sit and observe our mind states. Let the words of the Dharma talk dissolve.